everybody to From the Sidelines. Hello again. Today we have the pleasure of having Garry Church in from Football West. He's their education manager there, wealth of experience. So to start off with, Garry, the conversation we're going to talk around today is about constraint-led learning. But before we get to that, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so been in Australia 16 years. So I come over from London to Perth 16 years ago. I think coaching really started for me over there when I started to do volunteer work in youth clubs and saw that there was a little bit of interest in football. So I then started getting myself on some coaching courses in the UK, and that sort of built up, went through level 1, level 2, done my B license over there, and then moved over to Perth. Started doing a little bit of work with Football West part-time. And then about 8 years ago, the opportunity of going in full-time for Football West came up, which was absolutely superb. So involved with football all the time, and working through at Football West, managed to go through all my coaching courses through there. From a work perspective at Football West, so it's coach education that we're involved with. You sort of put many hats on, like a lot of people in federations, you know, like you put your futsal hat on, you put your state team players coaches hat on, your coach education, and wherever you're needed within the organisation, you get out there and do what you can.
Very true. Master, was it say jack of all trades, master of none?
That's exactly it. I wasn't going to say that, but since you said it, yeah, you're right.
You're a Londoner. I'm allowed to say that, aren't I?
Well, yeah, we'll keep that divide nice and pleasant tonight, shall we? The north and the south.
Brilliant, excellent. So again, a wealth of knowledge, sort of 18, 20 years in the game. What were you playing over in England, Garry? Because I know you.
Yeah, I played in some of the local professional clubs, you know, through the youth system, and then went into sort of Edgware, and I went Edgware Town. Sorry, it was Kingsbury Town, Finchley. But then sort of decided to just play local with my mates, which is I just enjoyed that so much more. You know, it was just as much enjoyment. The standard was pretty good. So yeah, I sort of played as long as I could over there. And then it's trying to get that crossover between playing and coaching, and that transition of, because I know that I wanted to be in football as long as I possibly can, and the next step from playing was coaching. So that's when I started to do my coaching badges over there.
It's a far cry from years ago in the way that we were taught and we were coached to the way we're coached now. And again, I always bring it back to being in England, you know, jumpers for goalposts, 16 versus 17.
Yeah.
The last goal rule always won. And they were constraints. They were by kids playing on an area field the size of a postage stamp. So when we talk about over here and more concise, and especially through the education, pre-COVID-19, through the education and Football West, what sort of constraint-led sort of, we spoke about the grassroots and we spoke about skills training sort of previously in the past 2 weeks. What's the approach of yourself with the constraint-led with grassroots and the skills training certificate, for example?
So with as regards to practices and stuff like that,
I love the way you say practice rather than drills, because drills are regimented. So it's a session, it's a practice.
Yeah, I suppose. I suppose practice is something that sort of picked up maybe a few years ago, when I suppose through coach education we talk about drills, and drills sort of simulate or relate to isolated practices, and they have a place without a doubt. But I suppose when we sort of talk about constraint learning, we talk about how I suppose the game becomes the teachers, not so much coaching, but the rules and conditions that you put in the game allow for learning to take place for the players. So players are sort of taking the responsibility for their own learning to some degree, you know, with the session design.
And I think that's a big thing, Garry, with the session design. So the coach has got to have a clear outcome of what they want.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, look, everyone's supposed to, we're always looking for that that silver bullet of a session. What's the best session? But you know, simple's best. You know, you can have one practice and get multiple outcomes from it, if that makes sense, which we maybe look at a bit later on in some of the stuff that we put together. So it's not always the complicated stuff that we're looking. Just keep it nice and simple, something that the players are familiar with and that they understand, and it doesn't take them a longer period of time to try and understand what we're trying to do.
So would you say, and would you encourage coaches to do a similar setup?
I think so. Look, it's nice to have a bit of variety. So like I said, when we look at some of the sessions a bit later on, you probably get a bit more of an idea, but it's just keep it simple, I suppose. You don't want nothing complicated. As long as you've got sort of two teams' direction, a way to score, and direction, then if it simulates the game, which is what we want to try and do without taking too much of the game component out, then that's where your learning takes place.
So when you say about game component, and when people talk about constraint-led learning, some constraints take away that game element, don't they?
Yeah, so I think that's a compromise, isn't it? Like sometimes you have to take away a component of that game to get an outcome that you want. So ideally, the idea is to leave as much of the game as you can in place, and add little conditions and constraints in there to get the outcome you want. And sometimes, like I said, there's that compromise of taking something out, so taking a component of the game out to be able to get an outcome that you want. And then you can just, I suppose when you come towards the end of your session, you take all your constraints away and just let them play.
So when we talk about them constraints and you take something out, it's to get a high repetition, isn't it?
Yeah, potentially. I suppose, I mean, look, if you was to put in a game situation, so if you look at, say, for example, like your skill training certificate that we do now, so you have this skill intro where it's lots and lots of repetitions, and then skill training, and then it sort of the repetitions slowly decrease as it becomes into a bit of a game. But I suppose when you're having using games as your practice, there's not as many repetitions, but when the repetitions do happen, they happen as in what they would do within the game. So it might be a longer way of developing, if you like, but it's more about the players remembering it. If it's come from them, if they tell you or do it or see it, and it's come from them, the chances are they're going to remember it, as opposed to us saying to them, well, look, no, you've got to do it like this. This is how it's got to be done. Because potentially that just goes straight over the top of their head.
So you've mentioned then about we started going about the high repetition, but what do you think about the gig and going the opposite way and putting it into a game and then fixing it in the middle components and then putting it back into the game?
Yeah, I suppose like the gig it's something that I probably haven't used a lot of, but it's very similar to some degree of what I do use. But the thing is, if you ask the kids what do they want to do when they go to practice, to training, what do they want to do? They want to play a game. So just get them into a game first, and then breaking that component down if you want. So if it's an area that you need to be working on, then breaking it down, going into your intervention part if you want, and then going back to your game again. There's more than one ways to skin a cat. I mean, personally, I haven't used a lot of that, to be fair.
So you prefer the linear with progression, learning with the constraints at the end to get the outcome, to then release the constraints and see if it naturally occurs?
Yeah, I think I think a lot of it depends on who you're working with and knowing your players as well. So as of maybe the last sort of 3 years, I haven't really had a team where I've consistently worked with them. But prior to that, I was with one team for 6 years, which was, I feel I learned so much from those players during those 6 years, that you get to know the players, you get to know what works for them, what they like about the practices as well. So sometimes you ask them for their input as well. It's not about just, I mean, I know what I want to achieve when I do my practices or my sessions, if you like, but sometimes it's not. The players don't always like the skill training, skill intro, still game, or the gig intervention, game intervention game. So I try and vary it up a little bit, but make it so that it's opposed as soon as possible.
So why is that, Gary? Why opposed as soon as possible?
I suppose it's my choice, and because I want to get the opposition in there straight away. But then it can go back to the players that you're working with. So I might be working with players that maybe, they're not. It's not working for them because the opposition's just putting them too much pressure on the ball, and that is how it is within the game. But if I want them to be successful, I might sort of take that opposition out a little bit longer, and then add it in after. So it all depends on the players that I'm working with. So with the team that I was working with, I knew them, so I was trying to get the opposition in straight away because they just want to play. And I found that that's where we got a lot of our learning through that. Sometimes they get a bit distracted as well when there's that sort of repetitive, just pass, move, and it has a place. Don't get me wrong, it definitely has a place. But with the group that I was particularly working with, they just wanted to get in and play. So that's how we sort of structured the sessions from there.
Yeah, and I completely agree. When I went to Manchester United, Carrington, the academy there, they started to do games. They did whole part whole, and they started with games because the kids would nag their mums and dads to get through the traffic in Manchester to get them there on time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But if it was a warm up first, the kids weren't really bothered about missing a warm up because they know they'd be there for the game.
Yeah.
And I think if we go back, and everyone on this course or on this call here is an advanced coach, to my knowledge, it's one of them where the game is the teacher, and we take everything from the game. So it's a constraint that we work with to get our outcome.
Yeah, it's look at that, and the same again. It's, I suppose, you look at the time that you got available to you. If you've only got an hour, then you want to maximize the time you've got in there. So generally what we should try and do is get the players to come in early and take responsibility for their own warm-up. And then we would maybe have the session already drawn out on a tactics board so that it's there. When you come here, you have spend a couple of minutes, have a look at it to try and get them to sow the seed, what we're trying to achieve tonight. They take responsibility for their injury prevention and stuff like that. And then we just get into the practice as quick as we can.
Brilliant. So we talked about constraints and prior COVID-19 to now.
Yes.
And again, it's really hard as being an educator because, as you said rightly at the beginning, you've got so many fingers in different pies, whether it be state, futsal, workshops, and so on.
Yeah.
What about the COVID-19 and the isolation that's been taking place? What have you been working with?
That's a challenge for everyone, and I suppose it's trying to engage your players or your community. So for me, it would be about engaging our community as opposed to me engaging a particular team of players, because I didn't really have a team of players. So it was about trying to get something out there that they can do in the environment that they got in. So we got to think about the most simplest things that you've got in your garden. They might not have cones, they might not have lots of balls and stuff like that. So, we try and use things like putting socks down, or like a can of paint or something like that, that something that they can use at home. And I suppose what we done was we put some videos together as well. So I worked with Nesta from Pro Futsal Centre, and he was fantastic. And we put a series of sessions together. I suppose like mastery skills, if you want, because you've got to think about your confined area, you're working on your own. So we put these series of sessions together, and then Nesta actually executed them. We filmed it, then we started sending them out on a weekly basis to try and engage the players from a physical side. And then there was some information sent out about the mental well-being of players, because I'm sure we've all sort of felt some sort of I'm not saying we've gone mental, I think, but some sort of constraints where we're stuck in the house, we're in lockdown, we can't go out, and things become a lot worse than what they actually are. I mean, it's bad enough anyway, but you know, when you're not out in the community, you're stuck at home all the time. You know, things seems a lot worse than what they are, don't they?
Yeah, definitely. We've got Valeri's got a question here for you, Garry. So for you, a successful session would be when you are about to get the players to have a free game, and then they say what we've been playing the games all night. What does success look like at the end of the session for you? So basically, if you know what is success?
Yeah, okay, yeah.
I'm not going to answer this, Garry, but what is success for you?
Success for me is, so firstly, I look how engaged the players are, because you can tell during your practices, as you go through your session, how engaged the players are, you know, what they're like at the end of the session. So as a lot of people know, you probably evaluate your session, and the first thing you do is evaluate yourself, as opposed, because there's many times you've had a bad session and you think, God, the players were awful tonight. When in actual fact, you know what, it was probably my session itself. So the first thing is you look at yourself and you reflect. So I always used to think about it on the drive home, and I'd go through what we done tonight and what players, because not everybody picks up everything in one session, but there are those nights when things just fall into place. You know, the work rate's great, the engagement from the players is good, and what they take away at the end. So we do a bit of Q&A at the end of the practice to find out what they're taking away from the practice as well.
Yeah. Garry, just to add on to this, because I've reread it and again. So you said you want to get opposition there straight away. I think the way Valeri's asking the question is, well, if they're playing a game and they're playing a game and they're playing a game, how do you gain success from it? But has a player ever complained to you about playing a game or having opposition in there?
No, not a game, but I've definitely played. Had a little bit of complaints about when we sort of maybe done like a passing practice at the beginning of the session, and the engagement's not as good as it would be if we had opposition in there. And we've definitely had that on occasions. And that can be for a number of reasons. It could be engagement from other players not taking it in. You might have players that have been distracted. It might have been the way that I set it up and designed this session. So, and I think that's probably why I sort of try to steer away from, with the group of players I was working with, that unopposed pressure, if you want, and just get opposition in there as soon as we can. So I think it was important that they had a little bit of time for themselves at the beginning of the session, with all the lads, all the boys coming in and talking about their day and stuff like that. But the moment we kick into the session, that's when I want everyone to be focused. So I like that, and that's why I think it's important for me to get the opposition in as soon as we can. And that's purely because the group of players that I worked with on a regular basis. If I was working with a group that I knew nothing about, I might put opposition in there, or I might put passive opposition in there,
and build up and see what their knowledge is and their understanding.
Yeah, so, and you can just jump those steps. So you can put passive opposition, and then if they're going really well, take it out straight away, make them oppose straight away.
Yeah, we've got a statement here from Paddy. It says, small group sessions are the answer for COVID times, or one-on-ones. Never better to get to know your players. Now, I don't know what it's like in football. Well, what's it like in football? Can you do that there? Or is it the complete ban, no footballing activity?
Yeah, look, I think that we're in a good place over here, and I think it's because we're so far away from everybody. So this is probably the only time I'm saying, "Oh, thank God we're so far away from everyone else." Generally it's too far to go over to that coaching session. It's over the other side of the country. But I think like our rules are over here. They're like it's 1.5. I suppose it's been set into 3 stages at the moment, and we're in stage 1, and stage 2 kicks in on Monday, where we can have 10 people, a maximum of 10 people in social gathering, as long as they've got a 1.5 meter distance between everybody.
Is that including the coach, Garry?
That includes the coach. So some of the practice that we've put together are based on 9 players. And look, it may be an opportunity that if you're doing one-on-ones, that's great. But if you've got a whole team, it's very hard to do the one-on-ones because it's time consuming. So it's not a bad place over here as regards to the constraints that we've got. They're slowly easing. And if all goes on track, stage 2 next Monday. And then by the end of May, June, we should be contact if all goes well. And it's all down to the government guidelines as well, because we're governed by that and obviously FFA.
Yeah, and FFA the end of this month, I think. No footballing activity to the end of this month. I know the ACT have opened it up, but there's still no footballing activity allowed in the ACT.
Yeah,
is
definitely.
the rule on that?
Yeah. It's there's nothing. I mean, as a club, you can't train, but you can have a group of people that can go down the park, and you can put a practice on, if you like, that's confined with the guidelines set by the government in Western Australia. And if you do that and you stay within the guidelines, then you're okay.
So that's a bit bendy, though, is it?
It's a bit what? Sorry.
A bit bendy.
Yeah, it can be a bit. You've got to know the rules, and try and stick to them.
That's it. So Garry, quickly, we've gone through a little bit about your history and your past and your passion. We've spoken about pre-COVID-19s and how you like the games and sessions to be opposed. We've spoken quickly about COVID times.
Yes.
And being isolated and going with the gentleman from the futsal centre. What I'm going to do, Garry, is before you give us some great information, I'm just going to throw it out there. Canberra coaches jump forward 4 weeks. And we've got the same as what Gary's got now. So we're on level 1, is it, Garry?
Yeah.
Nine players, 1 coach, 1 ball, but you can't share equipment with hands, so you can only use your feet. You've got to keep a 1.5 meter distance in between you, so obviously no tackles. Yeah. So coaches, just off the top of your head, what are you thinking? So yes, we can go back to football now, but it's a different kind of constraint football, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And it goes back to, there's many practices that you can do where you can do ball mastery, in your confined areas, if you like. But ball mastery is as great as it is. Trying to get kids to do that for an hour is probably challenging. So it's sort of sitting down and thinking, well, how can we try and entail most of the game without having no contact, which is a challenge. It was because you still want, I suppose, that element where players are making decisions.
That's exactly right, and that's what they haven't had potentially for X amount of weeks, doing that isolation, that execution of a football in action. Yeah,
so I tried to put some practices together based around the 1.5 meter distance, if you like. So it's something like 4 square meters that you're allowed to have. We've gone with the fact that you can use 1 ball within your practice, which is what the guidelines say over here. But there's some really important factors that we have to consider when we do that. So like when you're setting out equipment and you're putting equipment away, there's only 1 person that handles that equipment. So be it the coach or the team manager, and then that's the only person that can handle that equipment.
Yeah, so no kids picking cones up.
Yeah, none of that stuff.
No. What about bibs, Garry? Can they have bibs?
Yeah, so you can have bibs, but it's bib per person, and that's it. So you'll stick with that 1 bib, and you can't share that bib. So there's lots of things to consider before you actually get into the football practice. So like when the kids arrive, how do they arrive? Parents drop off they go, and then you've got to try and stop the kids from gathering in certain areas. So you may have to set out zones where they put their drink bottles in and drop it off, and that's it. And I think
you can't put that together, can you, Garry? You can't put the water bottles together because then the standard goes together. So we've got constraints now. So we've got Noel on, we've got Paddy on, Brian on, Dom, Carol, Valeri. with these constraints that Gary's just gone through now, what would you do? Somebody turn the mic on and tell us what your initial thoughts are. And then we'll go through what Gary's put together as his initial thoughts. So who's going to be brave enough? Paddy, you're always good for a good chat. So are you, Valeri?
All right, I'll say a few things.
Thanks, Paddy.
So, my constant message to my team is, please keep yourself personally fit. So when the season resumes, and if it resumes, that we can avoid the major injuries to start off with. That's the first message I give them. So get out there, be reasonably fit for when we start. As to training under the restrictions that have been listed now by yourself, I don't think that we can get anything effective out apart from getting really, really fit. Because we can be fit for the game, but whether that's going to help our decision making in the game, I don't really know. There can be some, I don't know. We can probably practice 25-meter pings.
Look
I'm
at
not
that
sure how.
social distancing on that long pass.
Yeah.
I think you'll be really impressed with what Gary's put up, what Gary's put there. And I think it's interesting, Gary, that we go back to that. Well, we can't kick a ball and we can't tackle each other, so let's go back to fitness. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, look, I think it's when you talk about kids getting fit and doing some sort of activity to stay fit, but also it's that mental fitness and that mental focus, which is really, really important, and doing some sort of activity will definitely help people stay focused as well. So it's not just that fitness component that comes into players, that mental focus that kicks in. That's as important as well.
Yeah,
Because
definitely.
it's so
Valeria,
easy.
sorry, Gary. Valeria, I know you took your mic off there, mate. Have you got a version of 9 players? Just before you do answer, I'm going to throw another curveball in there. If you're working with more than 9 players, how do you stagger your sessions? How do you make sure you get the same outcome? And do the club have the facilities for you to double your training? Because you can only train 9 at a time. But that's another question. Sorry, Valeria, off you go.
That's all right. I was just going to say, I suppose if you do happen to have up to 9 players during the actual session, and you still have the 1.5-meter distance, would you be able to still have a passive training session, as in when it comes to constraints? Because 1.5 meters to 2 meters would probably just give enough. I suppose I'm thinking someone with the ball and someone coming to press on him, just enough distance for that player to think about that footballing moment.
Yeah, I think obstacles and opposition spring to mind when you start saying stuff like that. You know what I mean? Obstacles, for me, is always a thing that you as a player need to be aware of. And if they're moving obstacles, then you've really got to think of that PDA, haven't you? That perception of what you're seeing. Gary, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, well, that is just a challenge, isn't it? Because you can't have tackling and stuff like that, and we've got to be mindful and aware of the constraints. Or when I say constraints, I'm talking about the 1.5 distance between players, and still try and get some sort of decision making happening within your practice. So there is lots of ball mastery stuff that we can do within there, but then it's about, well, what sort of game, and I say game like because it's not a complete game. We spoke about earlier on about taking components out of a game to get an outcome that you want, which is what we've had to do, is take out the contact component of the game, the tackling component of the game, and still try and get some sort of learning outcome of it. So it is a challenge, and especially when you only allowed 9 people. If you've got a squad of 16, how does that work? You may do two sessions of eight players, and maybe work on that same practice.
And again, Gary, it's really hard because if you think about your sessions that you design, it's always minimum of 2 lines.
Yeah, definitely, without a doubt. Yeah, so it's hard. Look, I think you've just got to make the best of what we've got, and if they're actively involved and they're doing something, and that's better than them doing nothing.
Yeah, I think the flip side as well is you try and teach a sidebar to a player to lose a marker then if they've got to stay 1.5 meters away from someone, then you can definitely keep an eye on that, whether they keep when they're beside, beyond, beneath. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Of a player. You know what I mean? And all these sort of language that you can put into your session. Now, I believe you've given us a footprint, haven't you? You've got a footprint that you can show us.
Yeah, definitely. Look, it's a template, right? So it's a template for people to mess around with. So this isn't the way; it's a way. You know, it's like any practice that you do. You look at like the gig or the skill intro, skill training, skill game. They're different ways of delivering your practices. So what I've done is we've put this template together, if you want, and it's just about you messing around with it to get what you want. So when we go through it, you'll be able to see that you can put different conditions within that, hopefully, to get different outcomes, and hopefully still be able to alter the size of it, the size of the playing area, if you want, to suit the needs of the players that you've got.
I think what I'd like to do, Garry, is put the initial template up there, the first slide.
Yeah,
and go back to the question and ask. Do you want me to put it up, Garry, as I've got it here?
Yeah. You got it there?
Yeah, I've got it here, mate. I'll just do that. So what I'd like to do is, again, pose the question and have people answer. Oh, here we go. So this is your footprint. I'll do this slideshow. Social distancing again. This is what you showed us, isn't it, Garry?
Yeah. So it started off with 5 meter squares, and then the shaded areas that you see around the side is to accommodate players that are not inside the playing area.
Tremendous. So with that in mind, Valeri and Paddy came up with a couple of ideas before. Now, Paddy, you said about football conditioning, you talked about pinging 25-yarders. Given this format here of boxes of 5 by 5, Garry?
Yeah, that's 5x5s,
Yeah, so Paddy, now looking at this, what other things can you think of? What other options potentially might you have?
There could be some games we can play where, for example, you can't have more than 2 players in one square, and you can even put a cone in the middle of that square and divide it even further. So you do a little bit of a spatial awareness, or you have to run into the empty square, something like that. That's the first thing that popped into my head. So creating space exercises possibly.
That's it. And I notice there's balls in the corners there as well, Garry. So
yeah. So look, the idea of the squares is just to go back on the squares, that defines the area where only one player is allowed in any square, one square, any given time.
And that's given the 1.5 meters, Garry. That's
and that sort of allows, to some degree, that social distancing. So the conditions when in any practice that we do using that template is that you can only be one person in one square any given time. So there'll be less players than there is squares, but it still allows players to have movement around.
That's it, because if you've got 9 players, you've still got 6 boxes square, but 6 boxes free. So it allows that potential movement, whether it be lateral, diagonal.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So that's just one of the conditions that we put in there. So if you're not involved in the initial practice, you're in one of the shaded areas, which will be a coned area. And they're the same again. There'll be just maybe a 3x3 or something like that. And then when you actually are involved with the practice, you're only allowed one person in any square, any time. So, and that keeps within the guidelines what the government have set in Western Australia.
Okay, brilliant. So do you want me to go on to the next slide?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Is that the one? So again, hopefully it'll come up. I've just done it on one, so it'll come up on the other. But there was a question there by Carol.
Yeah.
It was passing the ball to be met by another player. The player has to move to another empty box. Dom English 3v3. with rotations. Again, we can't have 3v3s. We can't have any tackling.
Yeah. So I think what we did on here, we tried to put a bit of a theme on there. So it wasn't just a passing practice. We tried to sort of simulate something. So we said sort of playing through central areas. So it is unopposed to start with, but you know, as you said, that's one of the things that we've had to, one of the elements of the game that we've had to take out. We can't have opposition. So we started off with creating some sort of direction and movement from the players. So it was almost, if you see in the shaded areas, you've got players that are waiting. And then everyone else is based inside the square. But so you've got freedom to move anywhere inside that square, but wherever you pass the ball, you just have to follow your pass, and then the other player moves out that square, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, are the players related to a position within the field, or like?
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, you could do so. You can say the one and the three, if you like. And when I say 1 and 3, that's the number of the passes. But those two players in that square, that can simulate 2 centre halves, and then the 2 players in the middle can be your midfielders. So you want them to play on different lines. So you get them to play. You know, one plays higher, one plays shorter. You can, it's like I said, it's a template. So, and then you've got your 2 players up there. That could be wide players at the top.
That's it. And you can have diagonals, you can have the seesaw, you can have movements. You could even potentially, if again, this is based on striking the ball, but looking at this, what else could it be about if we go back into the skill acquisition?
Yeah, definitely. And like I say, you can get what you want from it. You can. It can be combination play. It could be striking the ball. It can be your first touch. You know, those sort of things. You might even want to sort of add a mannequin in there, and you know, it could be a 1v1 as he comes up. They've got, you know, as the second pass comes in, maybe the third one has to take on that mannequin before passing into the central area. So it's down to your imagination. You know, it's a template that you can use, so you get so much different stuff from, you know.
Yeah,
but
it's a great template with the constraints that we've got, which is brilliant.
Yeah, and it's trying to keep the players engaged as well. So it's you know, it is a challenge. It's a challenge, but we've got to try and, you know, combat that challenge, I suppose. It's for us to get over, right?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is as a footprint, I can see, again, everyone here, I'm sure, the same as me, that can see so many different things to do with this. And as you said, keeping them engaged straight away, there's the competition based in there. Competition constraints. How many can you do? Can you play? You know, you might go short to go long. You might have to combine. You might have to bounce. You might have to break a line. You might have to play through 2 or 3 boxes. Do you know what I mean? There's so many things that you can put in there. Do you want me to move on to the next one, Gary?
Yeah, go for it. So we put a bit of a progression in there to try and if it's the one I'm thinking of, it'll come up.
It will. It's just a little slow. The hamster's in the wheel turning it, so it goes.
You want to feed it.
But based on this, anyone that just wants to take the mic off, and there's been some great stuff on the chats as well. Again, we've got to be aware that in the situation we're in now, opposition, we can't lose the ball. So we're always working in BP. With regards to, you've got to have the 1.5 central the distancing. Thinking about activity levels, we want everybody engaged as much as we can for the area that we've got. So, is any coaches out there got any ideas about potentially what we're thinking, Gary? It should be coming up soon, mate. It's
no sweat, mate.
It's a little slow because you got a combination in there that says everything that I've just said about that bounce.
I mean, the thing is, you know, once you get one ball going, and the idea of having the balls in different areas is that the moment it breaks down, you can just grab a nearest ball straight away, and it's back on again. You know, so
there's an interesting question that's just come up here, or it's more of a comment from Carol. So when you're working in this, we always forget one player, don't we?
Yeah. So look, and the thing is, you're restricted because of your guidelines, but you'll see as we There's nothing wrong with this. There's nothing wrong of having your goalkeeper in there, because if you look at the goalkeepers in today's age, they're more that what they can do with their feet as much as what they can do with their hands as well, and they are a crucial part to the team. So the goalkeeper is included in that. It's just got the same colour top on.
Not a problem. And again, it's finally moved on. The hamsters put it into high gear, and you can see there that 3 and 4's got that little bit of competition. Bounce in there as well.
Yeah. So what I tried to do was set out maybe a couple of different patterns, in there, where there's like added a bit of a combination in there. So there's now movement from one square to the next, as well as not just following your pass, but once you've made your pass, to receive a pass back again. So we've introduced that in there, and I think on the third slide,
I think it's coming up now.
Is it coming up?
Yeah.
So the idea of the next one is, what I would say to the players is, what I want you to do is get the ball from the start point up to the top player on the left. Now, how you do that, I don't mind. It's you make that decision. So he might want to play straight across from 1 over to 3, and then 3 straight up to the top right, and they play across. Then everyone just moves around, and I suppose the term we use is just fill the gaps. Just fill the empty boxes that go in there. So you're getting players to look up, look around, and they make a decision based on what they see. So they might want to play into the high midfield, drop back into the screening midfield if you want, and they'll play out wide to the right centre half, who will play up to the top. But the decision's up to them. They make the choice on how they want to get the ball up to the top.
Yeah.
So you can put a
sorry, Guy, go on.
I was going to say, you can put a condition in there. So, players are very clever at cheating without cheating, if that makes sense. So there's nothing wrong from the player at the beginning, whether he or her just does a lofted pass straight up to the top player. So what we say is it's got to touch at least 3 players before it goes up there. And we try and keep all balls up sort of just around waist height type of thing as a starting point, if you like.
Yeah, you got it again. It's that constraint. It's got to bounce. You've got to receive the ball to play forward, facing forward. So if you do play along, they've got the back to the direction you want to go, and that shows with pass 2. And if you think of your pass 2 2 and 3, that's very similar to that midfield, that central location of hitting a high 8 or 10, bouncing back, playing over to the other side.
I mean, you can always put a rotation in there, as long as those 2 midfield players are on opposite sides of the box. There's enough room in there to go up. One drops, one goes high.
That's it, and that's a diagonal ball all day, isn't it?
Yeah, and so you can do that as well. It's down to your imagination, as long as you stay within the guidelines that have been set. So there you go.
So there's a question in here, and it sort of goes on to from what I said before about we always forget one person. And the reason Carol came up with a great idea, we could have goals in there. Is there an issue with putting goals in there with regards to getting out the goals or handling the ball? I'm just thinking with the constraints that you've got.
Yeah, look, I think that with the guidelines over here, so they will change where, and you'll see as we move on, there are goals in some of the other practices that we've put together. And it's about the first thing that you need to think of before you start putting equipment is that, as we said earlier on, there's only one person that's managing that equipment. That is one of the rules that you have to stick to. So as long as you've got one person managing the equipment, I don't see it being an issue to some degree. But this is just something where players are just working on their passing, if you want, as much as other components of the game as well. So potentially you might be able to add a goal in at the top, so you finish off with a strike. We've often done that before in a practice where within our warm-up, our goalkeeper is actually in goal and then finishes off. It's not a strike as in going to shoot, but the the message to the player is just drive the ball into the goalkeeper first. Just get the goalkeeper warmed up. You get warmed up. And players like that as well, you know, that shooting in a goal type of thing.
That's it. And again, as you say, the constraint is they've got to warm up, haven't they?
Yeah, definitely. So it's managing that as well. So you've got to manage that. So, but I would say is as long as it falls within the guidelines. At first, there was no equipment involved, but now you can have some equipment as long as it's managed by one person and it's sort of cleaned after as well.
Yeah, there we go. So we've moved on. So again, here's another version with the goals that you've just been speaking about. So again, we've got some ideas, and again, hopefully it'll come up pretty quickly this time.
So I mean, the thing is, you know, like you can put so many different conditions in there for the players. You know, you can put like a scoring system in there. So we've done in there for every successful pass, you'll get one goal. If there's a bad pass, then it's a -1 goal. So everyone's working on a point system. You know, if you do a combination within your pass, you might get 2 goals, you know. So
and do you put a time limit on Garry to harass them, to hurry them? Because obviously players aren't doing that.
Yeah, look, you want it to flow. So as soon as you've maybe got the ball into the central area and the next player's ready to play, let's get the second ball in as soon as we can, as long as it doesn't interfere with the practice. But I think what happens is that when you start doing the practice where they're making their own decisions, you've got to wait before that second ball come in because you don't know where that ball's actually going to go, as opposed to the areas that
Yeah, and I actually love this session, and it will go back to the other one. So my apologies, my computer and the hamster wheel's not going the way it should. But this is slide 2. So if we can imagine white players, the pass 1, 2, 3, and 4, and to 5 to a shot on goal. So that would be your step 1 and such, and then you'd move on to this. So when Valeri said about oppositions being potentially pressing them and being 1.5 meters away, then this is when we spoke about obstacles or opposition. These are moving parts, aren't they, that now we can't be in the same boxes there.
So this is another session. This is a complete session. This is I think this one was called like playing through the defensive lines, if you're not playing through the lines.
Playing through central channels, I think.
Is it through central? No, this is the second one, isn't it? Is this the second one?
Playing through the lines, sorry, mate, my apologies.
So playing through the lines, yeah. So when the first, because this will be the second slide, right?
That's right, mate, yeah.
Yeah, so you'd get, the first slide just shows you what it would be like if there was one team working at any given time, and then this is 2 teams working. So the idea is the blue team will work from left to right, and the aqua team will work from right to left. So all they have to do is get the ball. Everybody has to touch the ball, and then when you get to the end, you have to just finish off with a striking goal, and then you have to work your way back up the other end. So
so it's multi-directional. Whites will go from right to left and then go from left to right.
Yeah. And then you can have different conditions you put in there. So the red arrows indicate that, you know, they can move into space to receive a ball. So if you look on the third pass for the whites, they're actually receiving it as they're moving into a box, but that's because that blue player is moving into the central box. So the players now need to get up, have a look, see where the 3 boxes are before they can receive a pass. So decision-making processes in there, even though it's passive defending, if you like, to some degree.
Yeah, it's obstacles, it's opposition, it's positioning yourself in relation to the opposition where you can receive the ball to get your outcome.
Yeah, definitely. And then what we've done was you can put a little competition element in there. So you can say, well, look, you've got 45 seconds. How many goals can you score within 45 seconds? You can put a condition where all the goals have to be scored in the front 3 boxes. Or you can say, all right, you can score within any of the front 6 boxes, and then put maybe 2 goals for every goal that's scored in the second row of boxes, or 1 goal for the front boxes. You know, if it's a player, you lose a goal. So you can put different scoring systems in there to create a bit of a competition to some degree.
Yeah, and I think you can really zoom into this as well, Garry, because every moment in there, as you said, with that third pass for Whites, that's receiving the ball. So that's striking the ball, playing a through ball or a ball, actually timing. You know what I mean? For a player to run onto, but you've also got moments in there with first touch.
Oh, definitely. And the same again, you can take what you want from it, so you can change that and you can make it a defensive practice where you're working on players, which you might see in another slide a bit further on. But you can, with a little bit of thought, you can sit down and have a think about it, and you can get different outcomes to it, whether it's skill acquisition or whether it's, defending from the front, or whether it's playing out from the back or playing through central areas. You can, sit down and be a bit creative with it. It's just another way of probably trying to do get a practice out there, but trying to maximize as many components of a game in there, if that makes sense. So with is it Carol that said about having a goal in there? See, they're small goals, but if you wanted to, you can have a big goal in there, and if you've got two goalies, you put them in there. You'll find in there that what I didn't do, like I worked with 9 players, so you can have 5 and 4, or what you can do is have 4 and 4 and then have a floater. So then that floater then plays whoever's in possession, but as long as you're rotating that floater around and they've got their own bib and stuff like that, it's up to you to.
That'd be pretty hard to manage, wouldn't it? Because a floater is really a position that most kids want to play.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. But put a floater in there, 1 minute, swap them over. 1 minute, swap them over. As long as everyone's got
an issue with the bibs, though? Don't you have an issue with the bibs if you do that?
Yeah, well, what you do is everyone has a bib to start with, if you like.
Yeah.
So, or if you've got 2 teams that got bibs, whoever's a floater takes the bib off. So if you're fortunate enough to have 2 sets of bibs, then the floater doesn't have a bib.
Yeah, good. Yeah, just take the bib off.
But you just got to manage it. You've just got to manage your bibs, because like that floater is then going to put a colour bib on, and it's got to be a fresh colour bib. So it's
so I like it, mate. I think it's really good. I think Valeri likes it as well. I think his comment here is it's great, and I think the biggest thing in the slide before this one, this is a new one, is plenty of PD, plenty of decision making, because there are obstacles or opposition movements. Just straight away with thinking. Valeri also states the box constraint makes positioning a hidden learning as well. Is that correct?
Yeah. Look, there's so much in there. You can take what you want from it, and I think where you're having game-like practices, there are lots of hidden learning there, and although you're not actually focusing on them, you can have hidden learning in there. So within this practice, you'll see in the complete session plan, there's a scoring system that we have in that I've put in place in there. So what we've done is we've tried and spread out some mannequins in there, and players are allowed to move anywhere inside that area they want. So you've got your 3 centre halves if you want at the back, and you've got the blue centre forward. Now that blue centre forward can move across any of those channels. We've put mannequins in place to try and be a bit of an obstacle. So if your pass hits a mannequin, then you lose 1 point. That 1 point then goes to the other team. So now you're focusing on the accuracy of your pass as well. So the scoring system that we put in place allows for some of the outcomes that we want. One of the other conditions is if the player at closest, so the third, so you've got coach plays to the right sided, to the central, to the left. You can even say if the box is 3 in front of you, you're allowed to travel into 1 box. And that's recognizing where the space is in front of you, where in a game, if you've got space in front of you, what do you want to encourage your player to spin into that space? So we've put that condition in there that if there's a space in front of you, you're allowed to travel into there. So, and the same again, players can
you take the mannequin on? Can they go 1v1 against the mannequin? You know what I mean?
Yeah, you can. Look, it's all down to the ability and level of your players. So you can make the squares smaller, you can make the squares bigger, you can put more mannequins in there, you can move the mannequins closer to the first defensive line. It's just down to your imagination. You might not want any mannequins in there because you've got your two defenders at the back. One of them might want to step into that free space. They might want to press the ball really high, and minimize the playing spaces that they've got to play in between the lines, if you like.
Yeah, so Blue can only block the passes, help him with the mannequin.
Yeah, so you can only intercept a pass. So the idea was putting the mannequins in there was to try and restrict that straight pass, if you want. So it sort of just, because you don't have the players, it's sort of fabricating a player, if you want.
I completely agree. And again, if you think about it, if you think about the back white, so you said 3 defenders. I'll use 3 defenders, an active number 9 in the blue, and the 2 yellow mannequins are potentially 7-11. If not, it would just be an easy pass forward, and the blue would feel very hard done by.
Yeah, definitely. So what else I've put in there? If you look, there's 2 goals either side of behind the white players. So if the blue team did intercept a pass, then they'll get a point for intercepting it, but then they'll get two additional goals. Sorry, 1 goal for intercepting the pass, but then they'll get 2 additional goals if they can play the ball through the zones and scoring 1 of them goals. So there's an outcome for the defenders, if you want. There's nothing worse when defenders working really hard, regain possession, and don't have an outcome.
And then give the ball back to the attackers so they can get better at going forward.
Yeah. So, and what's key here is obviously rotating the players on a regular basis as well. So everyone's getting that opportunity to play in both roles. So same again, you can turn that around so you can work on the defensive side if you want, and change the numbers around so you've got more defenders if you wanted to.
Yeah,
it's up to you.
I think what's really evident of the sessions that you put forward is, and I love the way you said it's one way, it's not the way. I think anything in football we do, there's multiple ways to do it. But I love the way that these sessions have the full components of the game. They can still be isolated to a pattern of practice or a pattern of play, to an isolated moment, whether it be first touch striking or one. But there's so much components of a game in there with no opposition. It's really, really good.
Yeah. So and I suppose it's working with what we've got. So it's hopefully the players go out there and they'll enjoy that as well. And the same again, you can, to make it challenging, you just adjust the grid sizes. But the challenge with adjusting the grid sizes is there's only one person can move the cones as well. So the conditions over in WA is, with all the equipment and stuff like that you can't have everybody touching the equipment. So it's just one person, whether it's the coach. So it's knowing your players. So if you know your players, you might want smaller grids. If you think they might want them a bit bigger, then you adjust them up to suit the size of for the players that you got.
Garry, thank you very much for your time. We're bang on nearly 8 o'clock now. Has anybody got any practice? I was just going to say, has anybody got any questions? I think Paddy's just put one up there. But you could do some minor game training as well with them squares. I think definitely it's open for that.
Yeah.
I
mean, you can do like you can even just do like your passing from short passing to long passing. So you just work across the square. So you've got 3 players in each of the squares, and they can move up or down one zone. Receive at different angles, or it might be the set back and then a lofted pass over. There's so much you can do within those practices, within that grid.
Brilliant. Has anybody got any questions for Garry before we finish? Dan, again, thank you very much, Garry, for sharing that with us.
No, mate. It's my pleasure, mate. Absolute pleasure.
I have one, just a quick one. In relation to the conditioning, I guess. So as the kids start going back to training, say, under 12s or 13s, for example, and I mean, obviously, I don't know if we will be able to go to tournaments, but if we are and we're giving two weeks notice, say, for example, you've got 2 weeks before competition starts, how do you see that the conditioning part of it? Would you see it as we have to understand that it's not going to be perfect and therefore just work on the kids' skills, or would you, you know what I mean? Would you ignore the conditioning part of things because the training would give him that fitness?
Yeah, I think, look, I think with kids of 13 years old, the conditioning comes within the games that you put together, as opposed to having like a running around the pitch or stuff like that, because that's really crucial. I get lots and lots of touches on the ball, and everyone's going to be in the similar boat as well. So, you know, players can probably do a bit of stuff around the park on their own from a fitness component if you want, but when you've got them together within your team environment, you want to maximize them with a ball as opposed to not having a ball. The running and stuff they can probably do on their own in their own time, at a park, if you like.
Yeah, I agree with you, Gary. I think football is conditioning. Conditioning is football. And when we talk, Valerie, when you mentioned about the football condition, I always think back to the football and explosive action. Do you know what I mean? And that's the football and explosive action is that sprint to the ball. That's challenge, and I think that needs to be built up.
Yeah, and I guess that template, as you had there, Garry, that template can assist with that, right? Building that football conditioning into it.
Yeah, definitely. It's if you give them the freedom to move around within that area, so it's short, explosive stuff. So, you know, when they receive the ball, if they've got a free zone in front of them, they can drive into it with the ball. You may even say they can go as many zones as they want, as long as it's not shut off by a defender. Then then the defenders have to start working on their movement as well. So, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think the last slide that was on there about the mannequins and the defenders, definitely that number 9 as such, closing a passing line, that takes that explosive football in action to get there, that physical action to get there. So that's that build up for me, and that maintenance of football conditioning.
Yeah, definitely. It's like, there's plenty of movement that centre forward has to make, without a doubt. So, and you want them to make it smartly as well. So, you know, play smart and get the. We actually put what I've done was I put a condition in there about the communication side of things, because, you know, we as coaches start talking, but you got to put some. I know, you know, I've sort of found by putting a little bit of a constraint in there of, you know, if you don't put a communication on the ball, then you might lose a point, or, you know, you've got to try and put a message on the ball if you can, of some description, you know, to get them to encourage, because you can have non-verbal communication as well. You know, it's not just all about talking inside. It might just be a movement from a player that sticks his hand out, or just his body positioning tells you that how he wants the ball or she wants the ball.
That's it. From a defensive point of view, you haven't got eyes in the back of your head, so right shoulder, left shoulder.
Exactly.
You know, where do you need to move, and it's all them little gems that this practice, this footprint we can get through to our players.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah. So I mean, look, I suppose the long and short of these practices are got to work within the conditions that you have set by your government or the government as well. So like we go to stage 2 on Monday, I think it is, where we can have 20 people within a practice, but you still have your social distancing, you know, no sharing of bibs and stuff like that. And what's really important is that, as I mentioned earlier, one person looks after all the equipment and manages that. It's cleaned after the session as well. And it might sound a bit, well, we never clean our equipment. But, you know, if that's the precautions that we have to take to allow football to happen, then it's a small price to pay.
Definitely, I agree. Just before we close up again, and one last question for Garry, if we have one. If not, we'll thank him for his time. We'll call from the sideline for today. Any last question? Anyone? Garry, I think you've answered everyone's question. I think it's all clear as mud, mate. Bonus. Thank you very much, Garry. Thank you very much for your time. Much appreciated.
It's been my pleasure.
Your knowledge. It's been absolutely tremendous.
I've enjoyed it, mate. Thanks for having me.
Not a problem, and I'll be in contact, and I'm sure everyone here would like to see them session plans, and we'll nick them off you if that's okay, and share them with the group.
Yeah, no sweat. We'll get them over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Garry.
Cheers, mate. All the best.
Cheers. Thank you.
See ya.
See ya, mate.